Welcome to Realty Web Series. Shared economy is gaining momentum in the country. The millennium workforce in urban areas and metros has turned to options beyond traditional owning or renting. Unlike earlier, when ownership was fundamental to success in life, today sharing has taken the center stage. While the idea has gained traction in the transportation sector with concepts such as pooled shared rides, it has also made an imprint in the commercial real estate segment under co-working and co-living on the residential side. With the nomadic millennials of today placing more emphasis on experiences and lifestyle rather than ownership, co-living is making waves in the residential sector. To discuss the sector, we have today with us joining Mani Rangarajan, Group CEO Housing.com, Uday Lakkar, Founder and CEO Koho, Jitendra Jagdev, Founder and CEO Hello World, Shubha Lal, Co-Founder Your Space, Ajay Sharma, MD Valuation Services Colliers. Very soon we'll be joined by Ankit Gupta, CEO Frontier Business OYO, and Manvendra Jha, Assistant Editor PTI. Mani, I'll start with you. Welcome. I welcome all the guests on behalf of Realty Web Series. Mani, now there is lots of uncertainty and fluctuations in job prospects, which is altering, and the demand dynamics of the residential sector is also changing. So in the last 1 decade or so, we have seen careers have become more dynamic, and millennials are not sure how long they want to remain in a job and in a particular city. So you think it's time now that co-living is to spread beyond the top 7-8 cities?
No, absolutely. So when you look at co-living as a segment, right, largely caters to the millennial population. And India, as most of us know, has the largest millennial working population in the world. And a fair amount, a number of them are also migrants. So one thing when it comes to the co-living spaces, traditionally there are now two segments. So one is the organized segment, which comprises people like Oyo and Zolo and Co-live and Nestaway and all of that. And then there's an organized segment, which is the PG segment, which is traditionally been known in India as paying guest, where people tend to live in spaces which are owned by individual landlords. So as I see the way the co-living segment is panning out, and given the dynamics in the economy right now, so people are not really sure of how long they're going to have their jobs, and considering that getting into 11 months long rental leases is going to be a challenge for a lot of the millennials. The second thing is that this given pandemic has imposed a lot of restrictions in terms of social distancing, hygiene, and in terms of convenience. And when I look at this, then there is going to be a lot of movement towards the organized co-living players from the paying guests. So the premium difference between staying in a co-living kind of setup and a PG kind of setup is not much, about 10 to 15%. But though, millennials, particularly those who have started their careers relatively early, are relatively price sensitive, I suspect that they would not mind paying the additional 10 to 15% in order to be able to stay in a very hygienic place. The last thing I wanted to emphasize on the living segment is that today we are living in a world which is kind of a new normal, where a lot of us are pulled in indoors without any sort of communication with the outside world whatsoever. And co-living create like some sort of microcosm in society by underlying the values of hygiene and cleanliness, and at the same time providing an opportunity to create some sort of a semblance of a community, right? Not the community that we know of, because it provides an opportunity for people of a single age group to interact, whether the interaction is virtual or whether the interaction is for fleeting moments in a day. I think the mental health of people living in a co-living setup would tend to be better than that of people who are staying in a traditional real estate kind of setup. And also considering the fact that companies are now encouraging work from home, I think co-living companies can provide a tremendous infrastructure support in terms of Wi-Fi, ensuring ready connectivity, uh, and also food, so that people can work remotely uh, from the comforts of the co-living spaces without having to venture outside.
I'll put the same question to all the panelists to start with, and if I get a short reply from all of you, and then I'll go further. Uday, you think co-living is going to spread beyond the 7-8 top cities, and by when do you see so, and what's going to be the growth rate of the co-living segment then in that case?
I think co-living as a concept itself will be a combination of co-living as well as managed rental accommodations, right? So I am more bullish about rental economy in general, right? Because people are postponing purchases, and within rental, if something is managed well, enabled with technology, it's a good thing. It's a useful thing, right? And that utilitarian concept could be in tier 1 and tier 2. Of course, given the fact that most of the corporate jobs would more likely than not still continue to be in tier 1 cities, let's say the top 7, 8, 10 cities and all. It's likely that the bulk of the of this kind of industry, co-living and managed rental industry, will end up being in tier 1 itself. Tier 2 or the fringes of tier 2, the likes of, say, for that matter, Jaipur or Ahmedabad, Indore, some other cities and all might end up happening. But I don't think that. But I think that it will be driven more by the industry still, right? For example, if a TCS decides I want to operate out of Bhopal or out of Indore, that's what determines whether co-living players or this rental accommodation players will go there, right? So it's more like a follower mentality out there than a leader mentality that I'll start up a center out there or a facility out there just out of the blue. That's my view.
Jitendra, your answer to that? Are we seeing? Will we be seeing co-living spreading beyond the top cities?
So we have actually presence in many of the tier 2 and tier 3 cities, and for the last 1 year we have been like expanding into much smaller cities, which beyond Nestaway's core position in Hello World, we actually extended into Indore, Jaipur, Vizag, Coimbatore, Bhubaneswar, and we have seen like a great set of attractions there, because like each of these cities has a certain economic factors which has been driving them. Many of them have some students present, some have IT companies presence, and some have local businesses that thrive well, like a lot of places like Coimbatore, where automobile is very significant, very big industry. So it is not like the top cities have all the charm. So we have seen significant growths in cities like Dehradun, Chandigarh, smaller cities, and doing phenomenally good. So I see that co-living as more kind of a bigger bracket, but the smaller things is the rental and managed rental place, which will be there in most of the cities already present. And definitely this will keep growing beyond the top tier cities.
Shubha, you too feel same?
No, I think I agree with a lot of the thoughts that are echoed. The only thing I'll make a difference is that co-living broadly consists of working professional plus students. So at least we are more active on sort of the student sector, and which is already present in sort of a lot of tier 2 cities. So whether that's Indore, Ahmedabad, Vizag, Coimbatore, like Jitendra said. So definitely there is a lot of scope of growth, but I also feel even in just the tier 1 cities, the share of the organized players, a lot of whom are on this call today, but even the others, is very small right now. So there is definitely a lot more scope for all of us to go deeper in the current cities as well.
Ajay, what do you say on this?
Yep. So I think everybody has put out their thoughts on this. I definitely agree that there is an opportunity to tap in the tier 2 cities. But like what Shubha was saying, the tier 1 cities yet not mature in the co-living space per se. So, a lot of investment drive will be happening in the short term to mid term in the tier 1 cities. Whereas, the tier 2 cities will form the support system for, the growth of the business model for the various companies that are involved in the co-living space. And I agree to Uday that the rental economies will make the most important factor in making co-living a success. And tier 2 and tier 3 cities, we generally don't have the problem with rental economies. So here it is more to do with the kind of, the demographics we are dealing with. So like students or, single IT professionals, who are, going to rent out housing. So they will become the demographics for co-living spaces in these smaller cities. So, but yes, in short term, I think tier 1 cities will drive the maximum demand, and tier 2 will become the supporting system for growth of the business based in the co-living sector.
Mani, a recent report by your company PropTiger.com says that the rental yield on co-living segment is around 8 to 11%, which is phenomenal. How is the yield going to change? Will this be sustainable, or there will be some sort of correction? And is it the highest in the across the segments, this kind of rental yield?
So generally, when you look at the whole residential real estate sector, right? Right now, the sector is little stressed, and while we are seeing good transaction volumes at PropTiger, it's not back to 100% as yet. So we all anticipate that there could be some sort of softening in the prices, and once the prices become soften a little bit, then the rental yields are also likely to come down, right? But when you compare a rental yield of, let's say, 2 to 4%, which like an individual can get through an apartment or through an home, the kind of yields that co-living or PG can provide is significantly higher, right? So from the point of view of rental yields, I think co-living and PGs offer much higher yields. But I would also like to say that at this point in time, some of the business models of some of the co-living companies are under stress. So there's Jitendra, Shubha, and Uday could probably allude to that. Because one is, we are seeing more short-term rentals in co-living compared to before. Right, so you're also seeing like newer segments emerge, like for example, healthcare workers also stay in co-living, and co-living companies have been very adaptive and have created like new use cases for that. The operating companies of the cost for the co-living companies have also gone up, and I would think significantly, because you cannot maintain the same occupancy ratios that you did before. Primarily because some people have gone back to their hometowns, and also the fact that social distancing means you probably cannot fit in 4 or 5 people into a single room. Added to this is additional housekeeping costs, additional sanitization costs. So while co-living offers like a great rental yield, and I think it's still going to be better than a traditional rental yield, the rental yield on co-living will likely come down at least over the next 6 to 12 months.
And then it shall stabilize, you are saying?
Sorry?
And then it shall stabilize.
And then I believe it will stabilize. But at least in the short term, co-living companies will face challenges in terms of occupancy and in terms of operating costs.
We also have Ankit Gupta from OYO who has joined us. Ankit, how much pressure is there on the co-living segment on your business? And post-COVID, how much the pressure has increased on your margins, on your revenues?
Sure, Balash. I would answer this in 2 parts. One, I think in the short term, just given the COVID scare, I think it's needless to say there has been some shift in the way the market has behaved. People are going back to their hometowns. People are leaving cities as we speak. So there is a drop in occupancy. However, over the past month, we have actually seen a significant turnaround. We have started seeing our occupancy starting going up. If we even take month-on-month basis, we would say we are almost up 50% as compared to what we were compared to last month. And I think there are 2-3 trends we're seeing. Number one, this whole concept of work from home is actually shifting to a work from home and office integratively. The second trend we are seeing is that there is a lot of focus of people shifting away from unorganized PGs where maybe there is a perception or reality about how the quality is, to more organized segments where, for example, we're focusing heavily on sanitized stays and ensuring that all the right protocols are followed. So that's the second part. The third part is
Yeah, go ahead.
sorry. The third part is if you look at the way consumer behavior is happening, people are asking for, instead of double sharing, triple sharing, single sharing or single usage rooms, and that infrastructure is something that we are focusing heavily on to change.
Uday, the cost of furnishing and maintaining the asset, is it proportionate to the return on your investment?
Not quite clear on the
I'm saying
yet.
There's a cost attached to furnish the co-living space, and then the maintenance, and now with sanitization and other norms, those costs are going to increase. So the return on investment is proportionate to what kind of cost you will be incurring or you are incurring?
See, the delta is very limited. For unorganized market, I think the delta is much more because you're trying to make a much larger shift. For organized players, at least I can speak for Coho, a lot of the things are already being done, right? If there was a need for hygiene, sanitization, or security, fire extinguishers, whatever norms were to be followed, they were all there. So in fact, it was not a drastic change. The external world has changed, but in terms of internal changes, there weren't too many. Actually, it's overhyped. I think the cost associated with this one. I think the cost of sanitizers and the cost of so I think in fact I've taken a full course on sanitization and hygiene, the chemicals, the price point, how to source it cheapest and all that. It's not very expensive, frankly, right? And people are more than comfortable paying it when they see that there's value in that. There's a small delta. I don't think that major changes happened really in terms of the cost. It's the same for us.
Okay, Jitendra, what kind of net absorption do you see in the next couple of years?
In terms of supply, you mean, or in terms of demand?
In terms of demand.
So, last 2 months, it has been like we have reached almost 75% of our highest numbers. So most of the things is like for every entrepreneur, like when things go tough, we have to either change, understand what's the market dynamics are changing, and accordingly, go for the modifications in your business model and also post the pandemic. So what we had launched was we moved to a complete video-based scheduling visits, like sitting from any city, you can actually do video visits. You can do, we were the first to start something called convertible home offices. So your home actually, so sharing is a thing that is big question mark. So private rooms, hosting private spaces, and focusing more on the virtual community, make sure everything happens through smart locks, no touch. So all these things actually propelled a lot of growth for us. So last month has been like we are almost seeing the peak. So most probably this month we'll see again a peak happening. So the demand is coming back because like people want to work close to office. They have to go to office at least once in a week. So they will prefer those kind of accommodations which are closer to office. They need a place which is safe for them to stay, which is also possible where they can work. So that is very crucial. So you have to give like industry standard internet speeds, 24/7 power supplies. It should not be like someone is like video bombing on a Zoom call. So those type of things has to be there. Plus, on top of that, if you can provide very hygienic food and all that, that's a big plus points. So we have seen a lot of attraction. We have started providing with vehicle arrangements so that they can go to offices and all that. So we have tie up with Bounce for that. So these are the small things which together make a good proposal, and that's why we have already seen quite a bit of growth happening for the last 2 months. And we are almost seeing like, so typically April, May, June used to be a peaks. So now we are thinking like June, July, August will be a peak. So we see all the demand coming back now.
Shubha, what all will be the key growth drivers for the segment?
So see, at your space, we primarily focus on students, right? So students are still to come back. We're still waiting to know when colleges will actually restart. But we started having conversations with parents, etc., in terms of what are they looking for. And I think a lot of their questions and concerns around sanitation and social distancing, etc., are already in place at most of the organized players. So for example, like what I mentioned, we're also doing all of the sanitation activities and maintaining the social distancing norms. I think parents are currently okay with a double sharing room. I think majority of players who have double sharing room will be fine. I think players who have a lot of triple or four sharing rooms, I think that will likely to come under pressure, and that's primarily in the unorganized sector. I think for the student sector, it's a question of when colleges will open. Whether they do come back, parents are more than happy to send their kids back and are happy with the current arrangements that we have made in this space.
But Shubha, there's a question, and we also have a question from a viewer called Shivani Gupta from Mumbai. She is asking, co-living or PG, what should be the preferred space for a student? And also, PGs are smaller setups and look safer, she's saying. And also, I think PGs will be more economical than shared living, than co-living.
See, it's a question of balancing what the services the operator, whether it's an organized player or the local PG operator, is offering versus an organized player, right? It's I think safety, security, making sure that there is actually a 24-hour person staying there, all the sanitation protocols are being taken care of. It's a professionally managed place, hygienic food, like Jitendra mentioned. These are things I think parents are going to start to put more and more value to. There are obviously fantastic unorganized players as well, but I think parents will start to put a value on privacy, safety, places which are hygienic and better managed, and it's going to become a question of value versus what services you're keen on getting.
Ajay, will we be seeing more consolidation in the times to come?
Yeah. So as the sector grows, consolidation is inevitable, right? So you will see the economies in the scales, and people will look at companies coming together and providing a larger base of service. So it is definitely going to happen. So I mean, we have seen this in Europe, we have seen this in US happening, we have seen this happening in China in a large way, in Hong Kong also. So for example, the Collective in Europe has been acquiring a lot of other co-living companies, and they have merged with them and they have expanded into newer markets. So this consolidation is likely to happen, and especially like going back to your first question, if you really want to move into newer markets, to the tier 1, tier 2 and tier 3 cities, and provide the same kind of facilities and other things, that requires a lot of capex, and it rather makes a lot of sense to actually acquire the localized players, and transfer the know-hows and the learnings that they have taken from the urban markets there, and provide much better services in those areas, and that will help. And that's how we are looking at it. And in fact, you look at a lot of private equity funds in the Europe and the Southeast Asian markets, they in fact encourage this part of the thing. So like in Hong Kong, Hamlet has acquired so many more local players in Hong Kong, and they have gone ahead to expand into within Hong Kong itself in various new areas. So this consolidation is likely to happen. But in India, I think we are still way off, and it will take some more time. So yeah, so that we have to wait and watch for India.
Mani, the Tiger report that I was discussing about, it also says a lot of companies were entering the segment, and is the trend likely to continue? Will we see a whole lot of companies coming into the segment?
I don't think there are going to be too many other companies come into the segment because you have a lot of existing players as well. While this sector has low barriers to entry in terms of setting up and managing a co-living kind of setup, the scale is very, very important. Because ultimately, if you're working with an operating margin of 10 to 20%, if you have a lot of scale, it's much easier to run a co-living facility. So supply aggregation is going to be very, very important from a co-living perspective. On the other hand, you're going to also see a lot of supply come into the market because a number of developers are themselves starting to explore co-living, either by themselves or in partnership with a co-living operator. And I think most of them will go partner with a co-living operator. So the new supply which is going to come into the market is going to be in two forms. So one is there's a lot of ready-to-move inventory which is left in the market. So a lot of developers are thinking of working with co-living players and provide that inventory so that they can get some rental yield and potentially sell that unit to investors who then get like assured returns on the property that they're buying. That's one. A second is that we are seeing that a lot of developers are in fact thinking of building for the co-living format, right? So they are going to build towers which are exclusively for co-living kind of facilities. So there's going to be a lot of supply come into the market. I think at this point in time, the share of organized players in the co-living segment is pretty limited. And as I said earlier, I expect a flight to quality and a flight to hygiene to happen. So the organized player share is going to get bigger and they're going to grow. Just to summarize, there's very low barriers to entry in terms of, wanting to set up a co-living facilities. But, operating that at scale and deriving operating margins is going to be a challenge. And I think there are enough players now in the organized sector to do that.
Okay, Ankit, coming back to you. There's a viewer question. Vishal Gautam from Delhi is asking, co-living or serviced apartments for corporates? Isn't co-living a better option for students only and not for the corporates?
Sure, I'll pick up from what Shubha said. I think there is a segment for each of them, and there is a fair amount of consumer experience that we are now focused on. So even for corporates, the kind of experience that we give right now is most critical. Right now, it's very clear that the consumer experience is key, and ensuring sanitization that most of us have spoken about, ensuring their comfort, ensuring what we are trying to, even on F&B, and even on sort of the society and social interactions, that is something that we are extremely focused on. I'm a staunch believer that co-living is a huge market for corporates because it's a good balance of where you get the comfort of all these services directly versus in a service apartment where you're supposed to manage all of these yourselves.
We also have Manvendra Jha, Assistant ADA PTI with us. Manvendra, your questions, please.
Good afternoon, everybody. I would like to start from, there are 4 operators sitting here. So I just want to understand what is the...
Manvendra, you are muted. Manvendra, you got muted.
No, it's unmuted.
Now, you can ask your question.
I want to understand from all the 4 operators sitting here that what are the challenges they faced in the last 3 months, especially from March 25 to June 25, in terms of rental inflow and rental outflow. Starting from Suva.
Sure. So at least on the student housing side, obviously we, for the last 3 months, most of our buildings are empty because the students have gone home. March was anyway around a holy period. They had already started going home and sort of have continued to stay there. What we've had impact is that we've started some of our buildings are still running because people who couldn't go back or are stranded or are looking for a better place to stay. So we have hubs in all of our major cities which are still running. I think for us, the expectation is that it is in September when colleges start, which is when we will resume 100% operations. In terms of impact on the economics, I think we've done 2 things. Obviously, we've spoken to, reached out for support with our landlords as well. Plus, we've spoken to all our students. I think they also realize that they are in a rental contract, and we've tried to help them as well because this has been very tough for parents as well. A lot of them may have lost jobs, etc. So whatever we had in terms of variable costs, we've passed on as discounts to them. So we've been able to balance cash flows over the last few months by speaking to both landlords and and our customers.
in terms of percentage, how much it will be, how much you collected and how much you gave it to the landlords?
So we were sort of cash neutral for April and May. I think that's probably the best way to summarize the impact of the last few months. I think for us, June is something that we anyway budget for because colleges are shut for 1 month in June, which is when students go back. I think for us, the bigger question now is when do we expect colleges to reopen so students can start coming back. We've already started getting advanced bookings for next session. So we are definitely quite confident of the occupancy levels for the next session. The question is, when does all of this start? So we are prepared. Yeah.
Uday?
Fairly similar, I guess, it's for most people, right? These are long-term contracts with asset owners and with students and working professionals. So our mix is more lopsided towards young professionals than students. In case of student, most people are paid in advance or deposits are there in case of young professionals. So largely cash neutral, and slight difference in our case is that we are mostly on revenue share contract with all our asset owners. So more than 3/4 of our portfolio is under revenue share. So our business model itself has been constructed in a manner which moves with the ups and downs of the economy, right? So to that extent, it's slightly hedged. But yeah, you try to pass on some benefits to the extent possible. And the audience that we cater are slightly middle class and upper middle class. So I think there are financial hardships for everybody, but it's not that bad that, okay, a couple of $1,000 here and there do make a difference, right? So I think, in fact, what we have tried to ensure is that try to keep making payments on the blue-collared side and on the other people who are actually genuinely affected, frankly, right? Otherwise, there's more hype and hoopla. One thing that I've realized is that the richer the person, the more the noise the person makes, right? Our richest clients or the students and all that, they actually end up creating all the fuss, while the ones who are middle class or who are working and everything, they're pretty sorted, right? So this is the irony of life.
Ankit?
So on the supply side, we are actually seeing a fair amount of reduction in the yield expectations of owners. And we operate both student housing as well as co-living, right? So the yield expectation is going down because real estate as a market, both the commercial as well as the residential side, is becoming a lot more in surplus. In addition, what we are seeing is that fixed rental expectations are going down. People are becoming a lot more amenable to revenue share. So a combination of revenue share and lower expectation on yield is helping us on our fixed costs significantly. Our operational costs are definitely going up because we are investing a lot more in all the cleanliness and hygiene and safety mechanisms for our customers. On the demand side, it's been a very interesting curve. April and May, we did see, like I said earlier, a significant shift in people going back. But the last week of May and this month, we've started seeing a significant return of people. And it's a large mix of corporates right now. On the student housing side, we are actually seeing a lot more direct demand from the campuses. And given that we operate a lot with some of the good branded campuses like our deal with IIT Delhi, with Plaksha and so on. So that's helping us continue our conversations on the campuses. But on the corporate side, we're seeing healthy demand coming back already.
Hitendra?
I think Ankit, Subha and Uday have all covered up all the parts. So I will say that financially, I don't think so. There was like much of turmoil for the operators' point of view, because most of the rent that goes down is because it's like the HNIs or the owners of the buildings. For them, it's definitely a cash flow issues for some time, and I think they're quite rich that it doesn't matter much to them. And apart from that, it's much more, I think, the emotional stress and the fear factor that was happening and that's still happening. That's the biggest worry factor. But I think for the operators, it should be still a good game because a lot of supply getting added. The expectations from the co-living, like a lot of players were expecting like 8 to 10% returns, which was like phenomenally high, depending the residential market yields are like 2 to 3%. So those will stabilize. And once it's for the people who are going to stay, for the tenants, it's a good thing now happening. For operators, it's a very good thing that's happening. So
Okay. My question is to Mani, because since operators will not admit this, have you seen on your platform the price per bed getting reduced?
We have seen that, though I would not say that it's been pretty widespread. There have been quite a bit of discounting that has been happening amongst the co-living operators. I don't want to go specifically into names. But I wouldn't say that the discount is like 30 to 40% or around that range. But we are seeing that some operators have discounted like 10 to 20% in terms of prices.
Okay. My question is to Ajay now. There is one deal recently happened between which Oxford Cap did. So they will be entering into own and operate model.
Right.
So how do you see this? Because most of the panelists here say they are into revenue sharing with the landlord, and now here is a company which wants to go into own and operate model. So
right.
What is the positive or?
See, there are many companies which do this own and operate model globally. So the obvious benefit is that apart from the yield, you're also looking at the asset, giving a definite return in terms of, so that will prop up the overall returns that the business is giving. So there's an asset appreciation which gets added onto the yield that you're generating from your business. So this is typically there, and even like any commercial developer you take up. So how do they do the deals is that basically they're projecting the yield on their commercial premises plus the asset appreciation. It's the same concept that's happening here also. So the asset appreciation part will probably push up the IRRs significantly higher for keeping the interest of the investors in the company.
Okay. I'll take a viewer question. This I'll take to Mani. Mani, Varun Kumar from Gurgaon is asking, co-living with more players getting into it, do we expect cost reduction along with COVID-19 repercussions, or the prices can go up? I think cost when he means he's talking about the rentals. Are we going to see the rentals going up or down?
So the yields on rental will definitely go down. Right, because as I said, right, even for people who are going to be buying in the residential real estate sector, the prices are definitely going to go down, right? And while there is going to be a significant amount of demand for the rental side, you can expect the yields to go down. See, when you look at unemployment, we are now looking at something like 25 to 30% urban unemployment in India. And considering that, a lot of people will not have the wallets to pay like heavy rentals, right? At the same time, the EMI to rental ratio still remains at about 2.3 to 2.5. So a lot of people will not have the money to buy either, right? So overall, we can expect rental pricing to go down in the near future.
Ajay, the industry is still in a nascent stage. Do we have any data what is the market size of the organized sector, at which rate it is going, and the average revenue per bed and average margin per bed in the segment?
I think we don't have that kind of micro level data, but overall, see, the co-living market today is in India at least is pegged up close to about $4 to $5 billion, and is expected to grow to be about $10 to $12 billion by the 2025. So that's the size of market that we are actually talking about, and we are seeing number of tenancies going up. So for each player, on an average, you see the tenancies going up significantly. I think depending on the model of each operator, the the parameters that we are talking of, like the yields per bed or the revenue per tenant, all these things will be worked out. Currently, that kind of micro data is not being collected, and obviously because some of these players are very new to the market, and many other players have yet to go public or in a large scale, like how that's happened in Western countries, where we can follow up these kind of data.
Before I go to Manvendra, once again, Mani, there is one more question for you from a viewer called Ashwini Gupta from Pune. He's asking what kind of developers would partner with co-living. A residential society may not allow such activities?
Yeah, so as I said earlier, right, so there are developers are kind of looking at two kinds of models. So one is developers who have like a good amount of ready-to-move inventory, and those developers are trying to offload some of the supply that they have to the co-living companies. And of course, here there's a lot of work that the developers need to do. So for example, if you take co-living companies, they typically like to have access to cameras, right? And that's something that the society may not permit. So Ashwini is right. So there's a lot of work that developers need to do before offering uh, inventory to the co-living operators. The second kind of model, which I think is which is going to emerge and going to grow, is developers building in co-living formats, right? So if you think of developers like Purvankara or Embassy Group, they are already launching and they're already working in the co-living kind of format. So that's the kind of model that you'll see a lot of developers do in the near future. And there are a couple of developers in Pune whom I personally talk to who are also trying to build specifically in a co-living format. So that model is going to be very, very popular in a couple of years' time when these inventories come to the market.
Shubha, how much competition will you be facing from the student living segment, which is specifically designed for the students only, and you being in a co-living segment are targeting the student segment?
So, Palash, our business and our entire inventory is sort of student focus. I mean, and we face competition from two parts, right? Obviously, the other organized players who are targeting students. Now, what happens in the student sector is location is very, very critical. Students typically tend to stay much closer to their college than sort of working professionals who are willing to travel a little bit. So in that locality, you could have organized players, and we also have competition sometimes from the unorganized players, because like I said earlier, there are some really good PGs which have been running for several years. I think there is definitely a lot of interest in the segment. There are some inherent advantages of the student sector because students come for a longer period. It's typically a 3-year client life cycle. Parents usually have bigger pockets, so typically in student housing the rate per beds or charges per bed are typically higher than co-living. There is a premium on services and comfort, etc., that you can charge. So there are some inherent advantages in the student sector which I think will continue in the future. So definitely there's possible more players will enter the market, or there's more capital coming into the sector. I think a lot of what is also happening is, which is a positive for the sector, is that colleges are now starting to open up and wanting to partner with private players. Ankit mentioned IIT Delhi. For OYO, we've been working with IIT Bombay, and we work with about 15, 18 other colleges across the country. So there are a lot of colleges who now want to partner and, outsource hostel operations, because they want to focus on academics, which is the core of their business, and that's where there's a room for players like us who are professional operators to partner with some of the good colleges.
So if you partner with, say, any one institution for their students, would they allow you to allow the non-student occupants as well there? Would you be allowed to?
Typically, facilities are dedicated to that college. So, for example, we work with a college in Bombay where we have 400 seats dedicated for them, and we work with them through the course of the admission cycle. So we have a sense on how many students are coming in. We have second and third year students who continue to stay with us. So we have an idea of what's happening, which is why I'm very closely associated and looking at the trends of admissions in colleges, which is all very positive right now. So typically buildings are dedicated for specific colleges.
Manvendra, more questions?
Again, to all the 4 operators, have you put your expansion plans on hold or it's continuing?
I can go first. I think, like I said earlier, there is definitely a lot of potential in the sector. We've not put any of our expansion plans on hold as of now. We are definitely set the targets that we had set for ourselves pre-COVID continue. I think we're just being cautious in terms of waiting and watching to see what is happening in terms of when colleges are opening, because we have primarily a B2B portfolio. So we are in line with whenever admissions happen, but definitely on track to meet our targets for next year.
I would say likewise, both on the student housing side and the co-living side, we are seeing now enough traction out there, which gives us a huge boost of confidence. On the B2C side, like I mentioned, demand is coming back. I think there is no reason for us to think in any manner of pausing at this stage. So we are in expansion mode clearly. Similarly, on the B2B side, the kind of conversations and the deals that colleges are placing as trust in us gives us immense confidence for us to go out there and just keep growing.
As far as for both the Nestaway and HelloWorld we are concerned, we'll be more or less looking to consolidate the market little more, and look also into venturing new cities. There are certain cities which we had paused in the March, which we are planning to launch in March. Ahmedabad and Nagpur. There are a few other cities which we are planned to launch, but we'll be launching in August or September types. But hopefully, as everyone said, we'll be able to meet our projected numbers and the growth numbers that we intend by March 2021.
Uday?
Our expansion strategy has been more concentrated. So we are more of a depth player than a breadth player on the location side. And on the spectrum side, target segment side, we are more of a breadth player. So we do from student housing to young married couples, also that entire spectrum that is there. I have a slightly contrarian view to some other players here. I think the market has taken a bit of a hit. I don't think the occupancies, at least in our case, have been back to the same levels, right? And we feel that it will be the same actually till October, November, December, right? And I think Shubha mentioned about the colleges opening up later, and we have also got our B2B portfolio and other college ties and students and all. Nobody has a clue. UGC keeps coming up with newer guidelines every day because nobody knows how long will that last, right? So reality of the matter remains that although there is some traction within the city from unorganized to organized and in general people coming, but generally intercity movements, I have not seen that happening, that people taking flights from Jaipur and coming out here in Bangalore or Gujarat. I have not seen that happening personally, right? I think occupancies will be wobbly to say the very least. That's my take, at least from the sector, till the end of this year for sure, right? And I think Mani mentioned that two aspects. One was scale, one was quality. I will just tightly hold on to those things, right? Scale definitely has advantages and all, particularly supply side expansion is possible. And quality, flight towards quality is clearly the name of the game, right? Anybody who can provide quality will get business, whether it's at a discount or whether it's at par or even at premium for that matter. But yeah, it's going to remain wobbly, at least Manvendra. That's my honest answer.
Have you, any of you have closed any of co-living centers in last 3 months?
Yeah, so if I heard the question right, have I closed any co-living center in the last 3 months? Was that the question?
Yes.
Yes, we have. Yes, we have. For example, say we are very, very focused on risk mitigation as a philosophy of the business. As I said, 75% of the business is hedged with a pure revenue share model or with B2B enterprise tax and all. And wherever we see that that particular equation does not hold true, we curtail our business. We feel that scaling can only happen logically with risk sharing across the spectrum. It cannot happen unilaterally if operators behave like asset owners and take the liabilities on their books, having the upside of asset ownership, right? So either you have to own the assets or you have to behave like an operator. You can't be midway anywhere. So we are very sorted that wherever that equation.
I'll take a viewer question here. Shubham Agrawal from Noida is asking. I'll put this question to Ajay. College partnering will lead to co-living sector getting consolidated. So that won't help the public at large. And is it the right way for the future? He's asking.
So I think we should answer this question in two ways. One is that the partnering will definitely lead to a lot of places. Like one of my panelists said the entry barrier to this business is very low, so a lot of people are there. So what happens is as the organized players grow and the services that they provide are kind of known to the public, it obviously consolidation will start. I think the question is more aimed in terms of how the economies work for a tenant or a person who's getting into contract with these student living. We should look at it a couple of things. Like, the point is, what are the facilities that these premises are offering? I think the panelists have, in numerous questions before this, also have indicated very clearly the emphasis on quality, the emphasis on having hygiene and sanitization and other kind of facilities that they're providing for the students. So this obviously comes at a cost, and students otherwise living in, say, the unorganized PGs or in hostels, definitely do not tend to get these kind of facilities, and they spend more. A simple example is let us take laundromat services. Now, a co-living space can actually give you in-house laundromat services and charge for that. It looks expensive in the on the face of it, but the fact is that I stayed in a hostel and I studied in a post-graduation, so I know how much I actually spent on a month-to-month basis getting my clothes done outside and bringing it, and the kind of difficulties I used to face in seasons like monsoon and other things. So out of practical experience itself, if you look at this comparison of facilities to the difficulties that you would undergo in the unorganized sector, I think a lot of people will gravitate towards the organized sector. And I think that's how it's going to be. Just the fact is that even in a situation like today, in the pandemic situation, I think students who have stayed back in a co-living space and not traveled back to their homes, facing the kind of difficulties that we are exposed in the media today, they've been very better off, because the co-living operators have really stocked up. They have kind of put in a lot of efforts to have a high level of sanitization and hygiene going in their premises. So they're more protected, in fact, being in these spaces. And in Europe and in US, people, the college is closed down, and students who actually couldn't travel back to their home countries actually opted to going and staying in these co-living spaces, and that has helped them to kind of manage both economies as well as at the same time be safe. So I don't think these benefits you get in an unorganized sector. And if consolidation happens, well, that is how the nature of the business is. People who have money tend to buy out the other businesses. But yes, you also get a very good service, and you need to pay for the service. So it's as simple as that.
There's one more viewer question from for Ankit Gupta. This is from Atanu Bhattacharya, who is writing from Kolkata. Corporate tie-ups, how much does that in the percentage has shared today, and how much will it be in the future? Corporate tie-ups in the overall business.
Sure. I'll take this more on the co-living side, because anyway the student housing is a lot more B2B in any case. On the co-living side, we are seeing that in the current situation, about 30-40% of our business is coming from corporate tie-ups. The kind of demand that we are seeing from corporates to nudge their employees to stay in places which are closer to work, places which are more hygienic and secure, is going up dramatically. Earlier, it was a lot more for the individuals to decide how they want to stay and where they want to take decisions. But now, I think corporates are also being very, very vigilant about helping their own employees take these decisions.
Money, with developers facing an inventory pile-up crisis, you think developers will opt this as a way to clear up their inventories? Will they come forward and do more tie-up with the co-living space owners?
That's see. First of all, it depends on what's the sales velocity in the project, right? So, for example, if the project is not selling at all, right, and obviously it's not selling for a reason, then rather than reduce prices by 25 or 30%, right, and taking a lot of loss in the process. One option is to kind of partner with a co-living operator, get some rental yields, right, which could bring in some of the cash flows. Although the other side to that is that typically the contracts with the co-living players will be of a longer duration. It will be like a multi-year. It will be at least, I guess, at least 4 to 5 years in terms of duration. So that's account to developers like contracting to out the co-living players. But on the other hand, if the inventory is not selling at all, And if this is a way to give assured returns to people who are willing to buy, investors who are willing to buy, and if they can give the investors something like a 4 to 6% kind of return on the inventory, then this is a good way to get rid of inventory, which is not so.
For Mani and Ajay, there's one more question from Achal Trehan, who is writing from Delhi. Own and manage. This concept will curtail entry of new players, and only big or funded players will be able to satisfy. But that might not be enough to satisfy the supply, he is saying. Ajay?
See, I think we had this question from Anvendra on the fact that, whether owning and then, running the business makes sense. And I said that, yes, there is, in terms of the returns perspective, it makes a lot of sense. And therefore, a lot of private equity funds, which might be backing up the new players, would look at owning, and especially in current scenario where residential real estate is available at a significant discount. And therefore, there could be a lot of this thing happening. I think also one other deterrent actually in this space is the Model Tenancy Act of 2019, which is likely to come into play, and that kind of will redefine how the tenancy contracts are being drawn up. And with most players actually working on a lease agreement with owners or with developers in renting out towers, this MTA is likely to have a significant impact on how the model has to be reassessed in terms of its legality and in terms of what are the contractual performances that can happen. So which in turn can discourage the private equity players from looking at, because it kind of becomes a very difficult proposition to be managed. So therefore they would rather say, let's go ahead and buy the premises, because anyway your balance sheet is propped up with the the assets sitting on your books, and you're also making a decent deal. So that's the way we look at it. So yes, so that it might become a barrier, but that we see that this is going to happen more often now with this MTA coming in play.
Ajay, Colliers data also say the same?
Yeah, so I think I did indicate this, that the current market is about roughly about about $4 to $4.5 billion in India, with about about 40 lakh beds is what we are looking at. And in next 3 to 4 years, we are expecting that to grow to close to about $10 to $12 billion, with the beds going up to about 55 lakh beds across the cities in India. And the business working out, the co-living concept itself working from about top 30 cities in India. So yes, the market is, that's the kind of market that we're looking at. Yeah.
Manvendra?
Yeah, so I mean, Manvendra, just adding to this what everybody is saying, but what we are actually also seeing is that a different trend in raising funds. So instead of the operators themselves raising funds, we also see them tying up with developers and then doing a joint pitches to raise funds. So we've had instances where a couple of guys have tied up with developers who have gone ahead and raised Series A funding or Series B funding for their operations, and expand their base. So I think rightly said, the macroeconomic challenges will continue to be there for at least next 12 months. But I think the way we need to really look at is how innovatively we can start raising funds. And frankly, this is the time when it also presents the maximum opportunity to raise funds, and players like Nexus Partners, Matrix Partners, and we have SoftBank, of course, you guys know them well. So all these guys are very well focused on looking at how they can do more funding. But yes, there should be a sound fundamental to that. So as long as you have a partner who can provide you with the asset, and the operator can justify the returns in his business, I think the funding should not be that big a problem.
Do you have any data of how much fund this segment has raised so far in the last 4 or 5 years?
Yeah, so see, like I said, we have two types of funding. One is an operator-based funding, and then we have the asset-based funding. So as Colliers, what we have largely done is we have looked at an asset-based funding more than the operator-based funding. That's what we have looked at it. So what we have seen is about close to about $50 to $60 million have been raised in an asset-based funding in the co-living space. I'm talking only about the co-living space. I'm not talking about the co-work space, which is the larger space where billions of dollars have been actually been invested. So in the co-living space, we're looking at about $50 to $60 million being invested on the asset side base, not on the operators. So of course the operators, it's different. We have to see how many rounds of funding they have undertaken, and what is the kind of capital that has come in.
Mhm. One question to Mani. You brought a report a few years back that there's a $93 billion opportunity in this segment. Do you still believe that the opportunity post-COVID also, the opportunity is there, and you are still bullish about the segment?
No, I'm very, very bullish about the segment, right? Considering the huge millennial population, working population base in India, and also overseas. For me, this segment has a lot of potential in the years to come. And as Ankit rightly pointed out, right? So if you look at the shared residential market, that market is pretty huge. But the co-living operators penetration of that whole market is pretty low. So over the next few years, one of the things which you're definitely going to see is the organized players, the co-living operators who are there on this call, gain larger market share at the expense of the unorganized sector. Also, in terms of the traffic which you have seen on housing.com, we have seen like a huge growth in traffic over the last year. Of course, during the last 3 months, we have seen traffic specifically in the co-living segment drop by around 70%. Though, as Ankit said, we have seen significant uptick in the month of June, but still about 20% below normal levels. But the number of searches that you're seeing on Google, the number of searches you're seeing on platforms like Housing, right, and the number of leads that are being generated for co-living operators, it all leads me to think that we are that this segment is going to grow very strongly over the next few years.
One question to Subha. You focus only on student housing. Will you look at working professional also? Because that will make you some risk management.
No, definitely. So while our product is a lot more student focused, we get a lot of working professionals, so third year students who graduated, who've just started their first jobs. They sort of tend to continue to stay with us. It's just that the way we've designed the product and the locations that we have picked are closer to universities. And like I said, we have a lot of B2B tie-ups, so we are obviously entirely student focused. It's not that we don't welcome working professionals. We do have some of them staying, but it's a very small proportion of our current business.
But as a business model, I will ask to all the panelists, but as a business model, what is the best option to cater to both the working professional as well as students, or to focus on only one?
I mean, I think there is a huge opportunity in both spaces, right? A decision to target one versus the other depends on the player's own strategic targets, objectives, etc. Like we've, I think, said multiple times, as a big segment, there are obviously positives and negatives on both. Students are, like I said, have a higher lifetime value. They kind of tend to stay with you 3 years, but obviously the kind of services that you have to offer to a student and manage both parents and students, there are lead to operational challenges as well. And versus tying up with colleges, they have sort of their own demands. So I think it's a mix of both, but both are definitely very good segments too. Very big segments in the country today.
With that,
it's been half a decade since we have been building this company. So what we have realized is that you pick a positioning that, okay, you are in this segment. So after having picked the positioning, we feel in India, the behavior of students or young professionals is not so distinctive, right? So the way we have classified is that up to 24, 25, there's a certain kind of behavior. For example, when I was studying chartered accountancy, in the morning, I was a student going to Xavier's in Calcutta, and in the daytime, I'm working, right? And towards the end of the day, I was a teacher teaching, right? So basically, the behavioral patterns are more a function of age and disposable income as one segment, rather than saying that this is working. That's our way of looking at the sector. Enterprise and non-enterprise are different. The way we look at it, we cater to nursing accommodation also, large IIT campuses also, and to retail and clients also, everything. But we have seen a significant shift that when you cater to enterprises, scale is large, margins are low, and there is a certain kind of relationship management required. On the retail side, it's more of a brand play, and you try to sort of cater to an individual, right? So that's one way of classifying the business from our vantage point. And second is age-wise. more or less up to 24, 25, one kind of thinking. After 25 to 34, 33, till the time you have kids, that is one kind of thinking. Thereafter, again, there is an inflection point when you start having kids, and then the thinking changes. That's how we have looked at the business.
Jiten?
For us, it has been like both student and professionals. We have given equal priority. So we have started in some of the student specific cities also, like Dehradun, Kota, Bhubaneswar, Coimbatore. They are very, very specific to the students. And in other metros, we are gradually focusing on the professionals. For us, it's equal priority, and we see like both growing substantially in the coming years.
Okay. Palas?
Yeah,
Any
yeah,
more
I will
questions?
now wind up the show as it is. We are overshooting the time. I thank all the panelists for joining with us.